We now move to First Minister's question time. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Meetings to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, last week's unemployment figures revealed that more jobs are being lost in Scotland than in any other part of the United Kingdom. This week, we were presented with more grim forecasts for the construction and retail sectors in Scotland. The First Minister needs to realise that this is about real people and real jobs. The First Minister's Plan McBee, the one he boasted about to all who would listen, has clearly failed. So can he tell us today why 1 in 3 of all the jobs lost in the United Kingdom in the last 3 months were Scottish jobs?
First Minister.
Well, the unemployment problem in Scotland, indeed across these islands, is extremely serious. Of that, there is no question whatsoever. I think Joanne Lamont, in fairness, should remember that the employment rate, that's the percentage of people employed in the economy, is significantly higher in Scotland than any other country in these islands. And the inactivity rate, that's the people who are not in the labour market, is much lower. And these are good things about the job market. But the recession and the slow recovery is impacting on the lives of families in Scotland and across these islands. And therefore, shouldn't we turn our attention to what can be done about it in terms of the UK budget which is coming up, both in terms of increasing capital spending, which has been demonstrated as a rapid and effective way of getting people back to work, and also in increasing the funding to small and medium-sized businesses, the great drivers of employment in the economy, where we now know that Merlin as an operation has refused to deliver the full goods that was promised. So let's turn our attention to what can be done. That's what the Scottish Government is doing, and I suggest that all people in this chamber act constructively and do the same.
Yeah. Joanne Lamont.
As ever, of course, the First Minister focuses on other people's responsibilities and not his own. Indeed, his own budget for jobs and growth could be done under the Trades Description Act, never mind talk about the budget at a UK level. Last week, the number of young people unemployed broke the 100,000 mark, and that is unacceptable. What was the First Minister's response? He had nothing to say. Perhaps he was much too busy falling out with his old pal Donald Trump, falling in with Twitter fan Rupert Murdoch, and arguing with the Prime Minister about who knows best how to run a referendum. All the while, more and more young people are being shut out of the job market with the long-term consequences we should all fear. To coin a phrase, from the very man who launched a consultation document in a castle, when is he going to put people before prestige?
First Minister.
The position on
Minister.
Youth unemployment is again extremely serious, which is why, of course, that this government has appointed a Minister for Youth Employment, which is why we are bringing forward initiatives like 125,000 modern apprenticeships over the next 5 years, some 60% higher than the level of modern apprenticeships that we inherited. And of course, every modern apprentice in Scotland has a job, a critical and important fact of the modern apprenticeship system in Scotland. And also why this, above all, that we are offering a guarantee to every 16 to 19-year-old in Scotland who's not in education or training or in a job or a modern apprenticeship, that they will have a training or education opportunity. That, to me, is very substantive action indeed to tackle the issue before us. We had, just a couple of weeks ago, a forum for youth employment in Scotland. That united the unions, the employers, a whole variety of people in the voluntary sector and indeed the other political parties. And people united to drive against the evil of youth unemployment and the prospect of seeing a lost generation as was seen in the 1980s. That was the joint, signed-up effort of everybody at that substantial forum. All I would ask Joanne Lamont to think about is whether she can take the good wishes and goodwill that was expressed on a cross-party basis in that forum into this chamber and demonstrate to Scotland that every party, that every MSP is committed to fight the evil of youth unemployment.
Joanne Lamont.
Of course we support all of those across the country who want something done. We want the First Minister to get on and do those things that need to be done, because the reality is it's not working. He talks about his new Minister for Employment. Well, that's one job for one woman. But what about the other 399 women who are losing their jobs every day under the SNP government? Because although the First Minister talks about it, despite the promise made by the First Minister at the election to protect public service workers, nearly 24,000 people delivering public services lost their jobs last year. It was the First Minister who chose to pass on 89% of the cuts to local government, and it was therefore inevitable that women would bear the brunt of those cuts. Female unemployment is at its highest since records began. Why has the First Minister broken his promise to protect these public sector jobs?
First Minister.
Two or three things about Labour's approach to these matters. If I remember correctly, Labour demanded in this chamber the appointment of a Minister for Youth Employment. Exactly. What is the point of demanding something in this chamber and then deriding it once that initiative is taken? It's also the case that Labour voted against having 25,000 modern apprenticeships in Scottish society. And it's also the case that 2 weeks ago voted against the increased capital spending in John Swinney's budget presented to this chamber. But in terms of Labour calling for action, Labour have, of course, the 5-point plan for growth, 4 of which are issues for the United Kingdom government. 4 out of 5 of Labour's plan for growth are issues for the United Kingdom government. So how on earth does Joanne Lamont say we shouldn't be calling on the UK government to do things when that is what Labour's plan itself is? And finally, on the extraordinarily serious issue of women employment in the workforce, we should remember again that female employment in Scotland is higher than elsewhere in these islands. But let me tell Joanne Lamont what we're doing about trying to make sure that women in our workforce are given their equal and proper status. In 2008-9, there were 2,857 young women went into modern apprenticeships. That was 27% of the total of modern apprenticeships. 2 years later, 2010-11, in a much, much larger group of modern apprenticeships, 9,656 young women went into modern apprenticeships, almost 45% of modern apprenticeships. Now, I'd like to see that figure even higher, incidentally, but it ill behoves a party who had a low number of modern apprenticeships and a minute percentage of women entering the modern apprenticeship to criticise a party which has increased the modern apprenticeships by some 60%. And the number of young women taking that life opportunity by fully 20%. So let us see if Joanne Lamont has the grace to welcome that substantial improvement in female participation in this workforce.
Joanne Lamont.
I mean, just breathtaking complacency on behalf of the First Minister. In the face of unemployment figures that must make our blood run cold to find figures and suggest everything is okay. Because in reality, on the very day that these shocking unemployment figures were released, the First Minister was giving a lecture in London about separation. Rather than lecture people in England, maybe he could take advice and listen for a change to a Labour government in Wales, and indeed those in other parts of the United Kingdom, where the figures have got better, not worse. In Scotland, unemployment heads towards a 250,000 mark, all on the First Minister's watch. Instead of focusing all of his energies on running a referendum campaign, when will the First Minister get on with the job of running the country and addressing people's real concerns?
First Minister.
Well, I asked if Joanne Lamont would have the grace to acknowledge a huge improvement in young women entering the workforce. Perhaps that wasn't a question that deserved to be asked on account of the fact that the answer was pretty obvious. Now, she mentioned Wales. I'm not certain that that's the strongest suit for Joanne Lamont to go down. Unemployment in Wales is currently 9%, which is very high compared to the 8.6% in Scotland. Over the last year, it's gone up by 0.7% compared to 0.6% in Scotland. The unemployment situation in Wales and Scotland is very serious. It's slightly worse in Wales than it is in Scotland, which is why the First Minister of Wales and myself have called jointly for the action from the UK Government that we both realise is necessary in order to address this crisis of employment. And one of the keys to addressing it is to do exactly what this government was able to do 2 years ago in bringing forward capital investments. As yet, the Conservative Party have adopted the Labour Party's capital budget, the one left to them by Alistair Darling. Deeper and tougher cuts, remember, than those of Margaret Thatcher. But last week there was a chink of light. In the middle of the discussions with the Prime Minister, I said, look, urgent capital investment, the way forward to drive forward the economy at this particular moment. Not in 2 or 3 years' time, but at this particular moment. The Prime Minister asked for us to submit a list of shovel-ready capital projects for their consideration. That's exactly what we are going to do. And I hope when that list of building new schools, hospitals, roads and the repair budget is put forward, we'll at least have the support of the Labour Party for the initiative to try and break the stranglehold of Westminster Government over the capital budget of Scotland.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
I have no immediate plans to meet the Prime Minister, having met him last week.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you very much. On Thursday of last week, the Deputy First Minister was caught out on a radio programme suggesting that the OECD endorsed a claim that an independent Scotland would be the 6th richest country by GDP within that group. Numbers that the First Minister has used himself in this chamber. Can the First Minister confirm that these statistics are not in fact endorsed by the OECD and are not official?
First Minister.
They are government statistics which we have placed in the library of the Scottish Parliament. The OECD rankings are the number of countries in the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development. And yes, an independent Scotland, in terms of gross domestic product per head, would be 6th in the Organisation of Economic Development, OECD. Therefore, it does tend to support the previous comments from Ruth Davidson from last year, when she acknowledged that an independent Scotland would be big enough and rich enough to be an independent country, in Brian Taylor's big debate in May of last year. But before she starts to talk about other people being caught out on the radio, I think we should examine the record of Ruth Davidson's remarkable interview in Newsnight Scotland, when faced with the difficulty of trying to reconcile Lord Forsyth and David Cameron's views on Scotland and the Constitution. She had a just remarkable formulation that she agreed with them both simultaneously.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you. Well, the Prime Minister agrees with me. First we settle separation, then we discuss devolution. On the issue that I actually raised for the First Minister, on Friday afternoon, the First Minister's adviser was hastily scrabbling around this Parliament's press tower, handing out a 12-line document, supporting the claims on the OECD. From this, we can see that the estimates of Scotland's GDP were drawn from the experimental Scottish National Accounting Project, SNAP. We find the figures on which the First Minister relies contained on the Scottish Government website under the heading of Data Being Developed, with the cautionary warnings that the statistics are not deemed fit for general use. They do not meet the rigorous quality standards of national statistics. They, I quote, are not official, and my own personal favourite, should not be the subject of media releases. The First Minister needs to stop presenting his assertions as fact and manipulating the data to suit his narrow purpose. So can I ask, did the First Minister authorise the release of information based on these figures to the media? And if he is prepared to be so slippery on this issue, how can anybody have any faith in anything he ever says?
Yes, I did, and yes, I will gladly republish the information on spice. It's really quite a simple calculation. What you do is take the gross domestic product of Scotland, and then you take the bit that's excluded from the UK Government figures. That is our geographic share of oil and gas production from the North Sea. Now, you may say, why should we put in the oil and gas production from the North Sea? Because miraculously, that appears in the UK Government's figures. It's only excluded from the Scottish figures allocated by the UK Government, because some time ago, if she cares to read Alec Kemp's magnificent history on the oil and gas, the official history of oil and gas, she'll find that back in the 1960s, a UK Chancellor decided to create another country in these islands. It was called the Offshore Continental Shelf, and it was created as a device so that the oil and gas industry could be extracted from the figures of Scotland. Yes, and we know from the leaks that have come out, at that time, successive governments were being told that an independent Scotland would be richer than Switzerland, while Labour and Tory politicians were telling us we'd be poorer than Bangladesh. So I think that Ruth Davison's in very shaky ground, trying to defend the exclusion of the oil and gas industry from Scottish statistics. But before we finally move off that remarkable interview in Newsnight, Ruth Davison has just said we'll talk about devolution after independence. What happened to the line in the sand? What happened to the line in the sand by which she beat Murdo Fraser in the Tory leadership contest? So what the Chamber must know, now that she's safely been elected in that narrow section of the community called the Conservative Party, now she's safely elected, is she going to follow the policy of Murdo Fraser, who she beat, or Lord Forsyth, who she phones up?
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much. The First Minister may be aware that Perident, a company manufacturing oral care products and located at Tweed Bank in my constituency, closed its doors to manufacturing on Friday, transferring production to Malaysia because, as usual, of cheaper production costs. There was a loss of 130 jobs. The intention to relocate was made public in June last year, so can I ask the First Minister what has been done since that date in preparation for these redundancies, which regrettably have now become a fact?
First Minister.
Well, I share Christine Graham's concern regarding developments in respect of Perident and the impact this is having on the employees affected, their families and the Borders area. I can confirm what we have been doing. We'll continue to do everything possible to support these employees. Specifically, the local PACE team has been involved in providing support to affected employees since Perident announced in June of last year their intention to move their operations to Malaysia. PACE support has been provided at various times over the past months, includes 2 special events for employees, one held on the 22nd November last year and one more recently on the 31st of January this year. I can assure Christine Graham the local team will continue to provide support to employees to minimise the time that those individuals are affected by redundancy and are out of work.
John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of NHS Ayrshire and Arran's extraordinary mishandling of an FOI request, the condemnatory report from Kevin Dunyan and the poor management and governance that may have put patient safety at risk as a result. While I absolutely welcome the Cabinet Secretary's announcement yesterday of an inquiry into FO practices and procedures by Healthcare Improvement Scotland, can the First Minister assure me that the lessons that should have been learned following over 20 deaths, 50 critical incidents and the creation of action plans that may or may not have been implemented, can the First Minister assure me now that the lessons that should have been learned will now be learned and the patient safety of my constituency not be put at further risk by the intransigence and ineptness of NHS Ayrshire and Arran senior managers?
First Minister.
The Presiding Officer, I should perhaps declare an interest that Rab Wilson, who sought the Freedom of Information request, is a personal friend of mine and incidentally a very estimable character indeed. He was involved in the critical incident in September of 2006. Can I welcome the way that John Scott has introduced the subject and support his welcome for the actions of the Health Secretary? The straight answer to his question is yes, and the detailed answer is the Health Secretary has instructed NHS Ayrshire and Arran to urgently review their FOI policy, report back to her within the next week to ensure that they are fully compliant with the legislation. She has also asked Healthcare Improvement Scotland to carry out that urgent audit of relevant clinical governance procedures within Ayrshire and Arden and consider any national lessons that can be learned. I hope that satisfies the member that the action taken by the Health Secretary is appropriate to these very serious circumstances.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
I'm rather, on the issue of Ayrshire and Arden, and in reply to the question of John Scott's, I'm rather confused about this issue now, because clearly the First Minister knew about this emerging circumstance, but yesterday the Health Secretary instructed an immediate report into the problems in Ayrshire and Arden. Why has it taken 3 months since the Price Waterhouse Group report was published in November for the Health Secretary to act?
First Minister.
I think the actions taken by the Health Secretary are extremely timious, and I think the double action of not just looking at the FOI policy, but looking to the heart of what the Freedom of Information request was about is very important as well, hence the also asking Health Improvement Scotland to carry out that urgent audit. I think most fair-minded people would say that twin action of not just getting the Ayrshire and Arden to abide by their statutory responsibilities with regard to FOI, but get to the heart of the failures in systems that perhaps are evident, and that audit done is a pretty comprehensive and proper response to these serious circumstances.
Willie Rennie.
But why is it taking 3 months for us to find out about this problem? This is a serious problem. I mean, earlier this month, I asked the First Minister about extending freedom of information laws. He refused. This case shows the value of freedom of information. I mean, Kevin Dunyan was very critical in his last report. He said this was perhaps the most serious catalogue of failings they had ever dealt with. Yesterday, the First Minister's personal friend has done a great service. He stood up. He's a persistent individual who stood up. When can we expect to see in this Parliament a comprehensive report covering freedom of information, covering all health boards in Scotland, not just Ayrshire and Arden? And will patients across Scotland have to rely on Rab Wilson, or will the Scottish Government do their job?
First Minister.
Well, the report obviously came out this week. The Health Secretary has taken the appropriate, serious response. Can I just say, well, already, health boards are covered by freedom of information. It's not the issue which he was pursuing recently of extending FOI. This is about enforcing FOI on a body which is already covered by freedom of information. And while that aspect is important and is being pursued by the Health Secretary, I'm sure he and indeed the constituency member will certainly agree that the underlying issue, that's health and safety and the procedures that are in place, is the key to improvement as well. So the twin action of making sure FOI is enforced in a body which is covered by it and looking at the underlying issue of the safety procedures, I think is an appropriate action for the Health Secretary to take.
Question number 4, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, given the economic impact, what action the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that competition remains on routes from Scotland to Heathrow Airport.
First Minister.
Well, together with our agencies, the Scottish Government is committed to working with airlines and the operators of Scotland's airports to improve our international connectivity. The primary focus on business, inward investment and indeed inbound tourism. It should be said there is no shortage of interest by airlines wanting to develop connectivity at the present moment. That's been exemplified by Emirates offering the double daily service to Dubai from this coming June from Glasgow. Jet2's continued expansion at Glasgow, Lufthansa and Azerbaijan's growth in Aberdeen. In addition, we expect the current owner and hopefully the future owner of Edinburgh Airport to compete strongly to attract new airlines that meet the demand and potential demand.
Kevin Stewart.
I thank the First Minister for his response. I'm sure that the First Minister will share my disappointment that earlier this week Ryanair announced its decision to cut back its services from Edinburgh. Can I ask the First Minister what progress is being made in urging the UK Government to devolve the power of air passenger duty so that Scottish airports, including important links between Aberdeen and London, can remain competitive?
First Minister.
Yeah, can I say I regret Ryanair's decision, but I think it provides an example of the difficulties both of the airline and indeed of the airport. As the Edinburgh Airport pointed out, it would have been impossible to grant some exemption or special deal to Ryanair from air passenger duty without doing that to every other carrier in Edinburgh Airport. And therefore, the solution, and a key solution, surely should be to exemplify in Scotland what the United Kingdom Government is currently offering to Northern Ireland, and that is the devolution of air passenger duty, so that we can make sure that our airports are competitive to expand the international connectivity of Scotland. That, after all, if I remember correctly, was one of the recommendations of the Salmond Commission, which somehow has disappeared from the legislation going through the Houses of Parliament in Westminster at the present moment. And just let's, in case anybody in this chamber thinks there isn't support outside the chamber, I've got a letter here from Derek Provan, the Managing Director of Aberdeen Airport, in which he states, quote, "APD, air passenger duty, remains a significant barrier to growth. I therefore welcome the continuing efforts of the Scottish Government to devolve ADP to Scotland so that decisions affecting the future of our industry can be made here in Scotland in the best interests of Scotland's airports." So say all of us.
Question number 5, Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to improve confidence in the construction sector.
First Minister.
Well, in the face of a United Kingdom Conservative Liberal government cut to a capital budget of over 30%, a cut first put in place by Alistair Darling, cuts that were to be deeper and tougher, according to the former Chancellor, than those of Margaret Thatcher, the Scottish Government is maximising capital spending by support infrastructure investment and jobs. We are switching £750 million from resource to capital at the most difficult time over this spending review period. We are taking forward a new programme of NPD investment worth £2.5 billion. As a result of that, capital spending will grow over the spending review period. Of course, with capital borrowing powers, we could do a great deal more.
Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's clearly the same old record, and unlike the Scottish construction sector, the First Minister's confidence is clearly not at -28. Is he complacent that 2/3 of the industry expect public sector construction activity in the next year to fall, and only 1/10 of that number expect an increase? Is he complacent that 30,000 jobs have been lost in the sector in the last year? Is he complacent indeed that the annual rate of new house building in Scotland is at its lowest level since records began? And does he not consider it is time to consider whether reducing the affordable housing supply budget by 30% in the current year is not the correct policy at a time when the construction sector is so depressed? Or does he in fact believe that the Chinese will build Scotland's houses as well as our bridges?
First Minister.
No, I mean, is Elaine Murray totally unaware of what has happened to the public sector capital budget across these islands? Now, normally, when we talk about the squeeze on the revenue budget in Scotland, Labour can say we've said, that's too far and too fast, we'd go at a slower pace. Of course, in terms of the dramatic cuts of 30% in the capital budget, the plans left by the Labour Party were to go even faster. So there's nothing in the slightest complacent about this government in terms of capital spending, but high time that Labour accepted responsibility for laying plans which saw the greatest reduction in public capital investment in the last generation. And incidentally, to Elaine Murray, every time we challenge Treasury Ministers on this, their first answer is, we've actually improved the position we were left by Alistair Darling. So if I put on Spice Alistair Darling's phone number, maybe she could give him a ring and ask him what on earth he was playing at in terms of the construction sector. In terms of what the government has done, if Elaine Murray casts her minds back 2 years to when this government was able to accelerate capital investment and look at the figures for that year, she'd find that the construction sector outperformed the rest of the UK, proving that public capital investment can have a substantive effect in the economy. Is it therefore too much to ask Elaine Murray at least to respond to the challenge of agreement that Joanne Lamont ducked, and that is to join in this chamber to submit to the current Tory Liberal regime the list of capital projects which could be spent in the economy now, benefiting Scotland, the Scottish construction sector and Scottish workers.
Question number 6, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I should declare my interest as a debenture holder at Rangers. Can I ask the First Minister what impact Rangers Football Club going into administration will have on the economy?
First Minister.
I think some people recognise the tie as well as the declaration of interest, but it's a very, very serious issue. And now that Rangers in administration, this is clearly a hugely difficult time, particularly for the 331 employees at the club. Now, Duff and Phelps, the administrators, have stated that they hope the club can emerge from administration as soon as possible, in which case the economic impact will be lessened. However, I very much hope that a way forward can be found that allows Rangers to meet its obligations to the taxpayer, to continue in business and to save jobs. However, it should be said that given the revelations of the last few days, the task facing the administrator is a very, very difficult one indeed.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the First Minister for his helpful response? I'm sure he would agree you don't need to be a supporter of the club to appreciate the serious impact both on Scottish football and the Scottish economy if the financial situation at Rangers were to deteriorate further. But can I ask the First Minister, given all the revelations there have been in the media over the past few days about the financial history of Mr Craig White's dealings with Rangers, would the First Minister encourage the Scottish Football Association to review urgently their rules about who are fit and proper persons to hold controlling interests in our football clubs?
First Minister.
Well, as I said in my first answer to Murdo Fraser, it's a very serious situation for the club, and the series of revelations made in the last few days have been very, very concerning indeed. To that end, I think we should all support the Scottish Football Association inquiry into the potential breach of a number of articles of association. That's its current rules. That's an independent inquiry, as Murdo Fraser will be aware, and that deserves all of our support and encouragement, regardless how difficult some of the facts that may emerge from that inquiry. As Murdo Fraser will know, the Scottish Government can't offer financial support to any football club, but the Chamber will be aware that the Government has given unprecedented support to Scottish football, largely channelled through the SFA. And that's illustrated by the £25 million we have pledged to the National Football Academy, the Scottish Government's £1 million sponsorship of this year's Communities League Cup. Now, the Sports Minister has been in contact with the administrators to reiterate the importance of Rangers to Scottish football, and obviously, as it would be for any other company, the PACE action team is at the disposal if and when redundancies are announced.
Very briefly, Chick Brodie.
Very briefly, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government to secure a football demand economy by engaging football authorities and local councils to establish community-based sports cooperatives such as those developed in Germany, Holland and in Spain, which have resulted in international football and sports success.
First Minister.
I think, obviously people's eyes are understandably caught in the immediate crisis engulfing Rangers and the revelations of the last few days. But there's a lot in what Chick Brodie has to say about looking at models of ownership and fan participation which have been developed successfully elsewhere. I would ask people to look at the strong support, stronger than ever before, that the Scottish Government is providing for football as a whole as our national game. And I'm particularly proud of the £4 million into the Youth Action Plan over the next 4 years, because it's actions such as that which will guard the future of our game. But it's perfectly correct and proper for members to look at ownership models concerning football clubs that have been successful in other countries, and where some clubs, of course, are looking at them very seriously in Scotland. And that may, in the long term, be something which many, many fans will be attracted to.
That ends First Minister's